Tonight, a ceasefire on the edge of collapse. With just 2 days left before the Wednesday deadline, the fragile truce brokered by Pakistan is in critical condition. The direct talks in Islamabad collapsed last weekend. No date has been set for a second round, and mediators are now scrambling for an extension. Not a deal, just more time. In a dizzying 24-hour reversal, Iran has slammed the Strait of Hormuz shut once more, firing on vessels, demanding the U.S. lift its naval blockade, and declaring that a final peace deal remains far off. The blockade itself has forced 21 vessels to turn back, choking off a fifth of the world's oil supply. President Donald Trump says his negotiators are heading back to Pakistan today, Monday. But Vice President Vance is skipping this round over security concerns, and the fractures at home are widening. The House rejected a war powers resolution by a single vote, while MAGA influencers openly rebel against a war they say betrays America first. Tonight, we ask, is this a genuine path to de-escalation, or are we simply counting down to the next phase of a war that never truly stopped? These questions and more are put to my panel on All 24 News Special shortly. Hello and welcome to this special 60-minute edition of the program. I'm your host, Grufaz Zachary, and before we bring in our guest, here's the latest. The ceasefire brokered by Pakistan on April 8th was supposed to halt the U.S.-Israeli offensive launched on February 28th, a war that has already killed more than 3,300 people in Iran and displaced millions across the region. After 21 hours of face-to-face negotiations in Islamabad, the talks ended without agreement. Let's get more with Zahra Farjani in this report, and then we get back to discussion.
The United States and Iran are set to begin a second round of direct negotiations this Tuesday in Islamabad in a renewed attempt to reach a final agreement and end the war in the Middle East, just 1 day before the ceasefire deadline. U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed that his special envoy Steve Witkoff, along with Jared Kushner, will attend the talks. In media statements, Trump said the deal with Iran will happen one way or another, whether peacefully or the hard way, accusing Tehran of committing a serious violation of the ceasefire while still expressing confidence in reaching an agreement. However, uncertainty surrounds Iran's participation. Iranian media reports indicate that Tehran has yet to make a final decision on attending the talks, citing an unfavorable atmosphere. Sources say lifting the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports remains a key precondition for negotiations. Other reports point to what Iran views as unrealistic American demands, casting doubts on the prospects for meaningful progress. Meanwhile, Trump announced what he described as a fair and reasonable deal, while simultaneously escalating his rhetoric. In a post on Truce Social, he accused Iran of violating the ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz and warned that the failure to reach an agreement could lead to devastating consequences.
Iran decided to fire bullets yesterday in the Strait of Hormuz, a total violation of our ceasefire agreement. My representatives are going to Islamabad, Pakistan. They will be there tomorrow evening for negotiations. Iran recently announced that they were closing the strait. We're offering a very fair and reasonable deal, and I hope they take it, because if they don't, the United States is going to knock out every single power plant and every single bridge in Iran.
On the Iranian side, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf acknowledged some progress in negotiations but stressed that major gaps remain.
We are still from a final agreement. We have made progress in the negotiations, but there are still major gaps and some key issues remain unresolved. We have no trust in the United States. The United States must decide to earn the trust of the Iranian people. They must abandon unilateralism and their approach of imposing dictates. If we accepted the ceasefire, it is because they accepted our demands.
As tensions persist and positions remain far apart, the upcoming talks in Islamabad could prove decisive in determining whether diplomacy prevails or the war escalates further.
To unpack these fast-moving developments, I'm joined tonight by a distinguished panel. Mr. Masoud Shajari joins us from London. He's a chairman of the Islamic Human Rights Commission. Mr. Shajari, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. And also we have Mr. Mark Lowe with us from Genoa. He's a corporate and geopolitical risk management expert. Mr. Lowe, good to have you.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours. And we also have Professor Paul Shaya, who joins us from Washington, D.C. He's an international affairs and geopolitical analyst. Professor Shaya, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is ours. And also, Dr. Hamoud Salhi is with us from Los Angeles, California. He's Associate Dean and Professor of International Studies at California State University. Dr. Salhi, good to see you.
The same here. Thank you.
All right, let's get to it. And I start with you, Mr. Masoud Shajari. The Pakistan brokered ceasefire is just a couple of days from expiration. The talks in Islamabad collapsed after 21 hours without agreement, and Iran's parliament speaker says a final deal remains far off. And now mediators are scrambling, actually, simply to extend the ceasefire, not to reach a permanent agreement. So just to buy more time, let's say. From a human rights perspective, what does a ceasefire mean when the underlying conditions of conflict, the naval blockade, for example, the military postures, the daily killing, still continue unabated?
Unfortunately, this has been the sort of recent story regarding all the ceasefires in the region, be it the situation in Gaza or Lebanon, and now Iran. The fact of the matter is that there seems to be very little commitment to real concept of ceasefire, let alone finding a solution, a sort of permanent solution. And Iran has been sort of demanding a permanent solution rather than just ceasefire. And, United States in particular, Trump and his sort of approach to international relations is extremely madness, really, I should say. There is every day, every hour, he changes his tune by sending a new tweet out. And really, there is a chaos. There is a chaos and there is confusion all around regarding what is happening. And Iranians seem to be sort of having to respond to this sort of chaos almost hour by hour and day by day. And I personally think the real reason is that the United States and Trump in particular doesn't want to acknowledge that their goals, which they have, if any, have not been achieved through the war. And so therefore, that this war has been unsuccessful and they need to find another way of dealing with it without acknowledgement that the goals are not achievable, not that they didn't achieve it, they're not going to achieve it. Then we need to move forward to next stage on how we put a package together to give people in the region a sort of a way forward. Otherwise, this chaos is going to continue and it will be damaging. And indeed, in any war, in particular this war, the damage is on ordinary civilians more than anyone else. As you said, over 3,300 have been killed. And if this continues, it will be much worse. And especially when there is no aims and objective for this war, then we are going to see more war crimes like targeting civilian infrastructures, bridges, and everything else, which means more suffering for ordinary people. Something has to give, something has to happen. And unfortunately, I don't see Trump is able to respond positively. And it seems that even he himself is not on a driving seat, and the pressure from Netanyahu and Israel is what sort of making a deal almost impossible.
Mm-hmm. And if we see this continuing, I mean, if we look at the reports, Mr. Masoud Shajare, we see human rights activists in Iran, they have actually documented at least 1,443 civilian deaths, including 217 children from the US and Israeli strikes during the first month of this war alone. And if this ceasefire collapses entirely, what are the likely humanitarian consequences for civilian populations, not just in Iran, but look at what's happening in Lebanon and Gaza?
Absolutely. I think the catastrophe has been happening not just in the sort of last 40 days or 40 days war or Ramadan war, but it's been going on for a few years. And the fact that the international community has been incapable to do anything about it is the main reason why we are where we are. And the fact of the matter is that the suffering has been originally in Gaza, Lebanon, and now Iran. But I put it to you that this is not going to be the only suffering. The way we are moving forward, and with the closure of Hormuz, then the suffering is going to go far beyond. And the economical turnaround or crisis for the whole world will mean that some of this suffering is going to be passed on to people in Europe and elsewhere. And Iran and the region will not be the only people who will suffer. And indeed, this is exactly why we are seeing a bit more concern when it comes to this regional war or a war in Iran, because it affects people right across the globe. And I will put it to you that it's not just economical sort of dangers and suffering which is going to come. The reality is that the world is moving towards a sort of concept of international relation, which is based on genocide, based on who's got power, based on, I tell you, you have to abide by it. And I think that is going to be much more damaging globally if indeed it will continue, if indeed we will see the continuation of what happened since 2 years ago, and it will go even beyond that. So I think the crisis is a lot more than just Iran or indeed the Gulf states.
Absolutely. These are fundamental questions about what a ceasefire actually protects. Let's turn to the risk management perspective now. What happens if the fragile truce shatters? And here I address you, Mr. Mark Lowe. The U.S. delegation is reportedly heading back to Pakistan on Monday for another round, but Vice President J.D. Vance is skipping this trip over what officials are calling security concerns. This is the highest level U.S.-Iran engagement since 1979, and the American lead or negotiator is actually staying at home. From a risk assessment standpoint, what does the downgrading of U.S. representation signal to markets, to Tehran, and to corporate decision makers who need to plan for multiple scenarios? And if we look at the reports we're having with Brent crude hovering near $98 per barrel, how should global corporations be positioning for the week ahead?
Right. Well, let's begin, as you began, with the question of this new round of talks rather than negotiations. I insist on the fact that the talks, if you want to negotiate something, you have to have a clear idea of what you actually want to achieve. And this has to come from both parties. And unfortunately, at least one of the two parties does not seem to have any clear idea as to what it actually wants to negotiate. Or rather, it has a fairly clear idea, but absolutely everybody other than the US administration seems to realize that these maximalistic demands are absolutely unattainable. Now, J.D. Vance isn't participating in this new round of talks. Big deal. In all frankness, I don't think that it brings anything particular to the table. However, it is significant because in any form of negotiations, you need credibility. Let me make a very radical comparison. Organized crime, okay? Organized crime. When organized crime wants something, they send very, very convincing people to talk to whoever it is that they have to talk to. They send convincing people. Now, they might not make the best of deals as far as the other party is concerned, but they never, ever make the effort, they never, ever make the error of sending people who are not credible. The United States is sending Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to these talks. Now, I'm sure they're absolutely excellent negotiators if you're looking for a business deal with a very rich country or a very, very rich businessman, something that everybody gains from financially. I'm sure they're very, very good at that. But I personally would not be sending a team like that to negotiate with anybody, never mind a country as sophisticated and as particular as Iran. So the message that this sends is a very, very strong message, but the wrong sort of strong message. This message is basically, we are in disarray. We're not sure how to get out of this. J.D. Vance made an attempt. It didn't get anywhere. There's no point sending him back. Or perhaps we've lost interest. We don't really know what we're looking for. We're getting bored of this. All we want is some form of solution that will allow us to walk away. And I do really much believe that at this point in time, Donald Trump's administration and Donald Trump in first person really, at the end of the day, just wants a way that they can walk away and he can walk away from this situation. Anyway, it's a very, very fragile beginning of this new round of talks. We need caution. We need to be very, very cautious indeed. There is an absolute lack of confidence, not just in any quick outcome, but overall, markets aren't confident. The allies are not confident. Iranian allies, United States of America's allies, etc. Nobody has any great confidence whatsoever in anything positive coming out of this anytime soon. I fear that this is another series of talks that will break down. Anyhow, ambiguity has consequences, and basically we are in a situation where we really do not know what to expect. We have a complete mess. The Strait of Hormuz question is a complete and utter mess. How much longer it will be a mess remains to be seen. We're living in a very, very dynamic moment where anything that was said or anything that was decided in the morning can change in the afternoon. So this creates a huge number of problems for companies, not just, if we look at the issue of oil prices, the issue isn't just market prices and pricing in general, but it means that anybody involved in risk management has to adopt a completely new approach to their job. I mean, this is a situation of continued volatility and continued uncertainty. So we have to revise all of our considerations in regards to exposure to everything from fuel and freight costs, the impact on suppliers. The list is never ending. But I mean, really, and here I close. But I mean, the important point is basically that in terms of corporate planning, the lesson today is that, we now very, very much have to treat geopolitical disruption as an operating condition. It's not an exception. This is the new reality. And we go back once again to touch the issue of resilience. Resilience is wonderful. Everybody's been talking about it for a long time. But resilience is actually very, very hard to implement because it takes a lot of time. And we are all working in a context where things change incredibly quickly. And this is perhaps the most serious and most difficult problem to address.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marklow. So technically, we're looking at a messy situation where economy is responding to whatever we have as an outcome from these talks. as you labeled them. So, of course, a lot of corporations and investors are reacting to this. We even have reports. The IMF has projected that under an adverse scenario, oil prices could rise by 80% compared to pre-war levels, with sustained elevated prices through 2028. So here we might be looking at a temporary supply shock for some analysts, but others would say it is structural reordering of global energy markets that requires long-term corporate repositioning. And this brings me perhaps to the central pressure point of this entire crisis, the Strait of Hormuz. And here again, let me bring in Professor Paul Shaya. So, Professor, the whiplash we saw over the weekend is quite extraordinary. Iran reopened the Strait of Hormuz on Friday, sending oil prices plunging, then reversed course within just 24 hours, firing on a tanker and demanding the U.S. lift its naval blockade. The IRGC warned that no vessel should make any movement without Iranian clearance. Meanwhile, the U.S. blockade has turned back 21 vessels since it began. From a U.S. foreign policy perspective, perhaps, how do you yourself see Washington reconciling its stated goal of stabilizing global energy markets with a blockade policy that is actively choking off a fifth of the world's oil supply and pushing Brent crude toward $100 per barrel?
There's no question that the United States has a goal to lower the costs of oil. They want to make energy accessible, and this is definitely a priority. I would look at the efforts by the United States to blockade Iranian ship traffic as one of the tools that they're using in trying to gain leverage in the negotiations. And I take the point of our previous speakers that the United States has shifted its aims throughout this conflict, and it's not entirely clear what their final objective is, or at least it hasn't been made obvious. But I think one thing we can say is it's correct that the president wants to end this conflict soon, but the way the president operates is that he's not going to take a loss, if you will, and so he's using the military, which he's want to do, to influence the way the direction of the negotiations take place. And so absolutely, the goal is to try to gain leverage. They want to lower the costs. They want to ensure traffic can move freely through the Straits of Hormuz. But I think that for President Trump, he's gotten himself into a situation where if he stops now, which might be appealing to walk away at some point soon, but he has to walk away from a position of strength and victory, at least that a position where he can make it obvious that it's a victory. And I think you're right on the question about the costs of oil, in the sense that for the United States, while the war may not be popular, the cost of gas prices in the U.S. is even more unpopular. And I think that's what's very concerning for this administration. And so what he might be doing is trying to take a targeted approach for some short-term pain, with the anticipation that using the strength of our blockade and really pressuring economically the Iranian regime, that it might lend itself to some type of leverage in future negotiations. And that's why what we were talking about with respect to Vice President Vance not attending these negotiations, it does appear that at the very minimum, the hope would be to extend the ceasefire for further negotiations, and perhaps the talks that will happen this week are not intended to reach a final conclusion, but to try to set the stage for that. And I think that's what this military exercise, if you will, is aimed at doing, to try to gain leverage and better position the United States to force Iran to accept some of the key core demands that the United States has.
Mm-hmm. But then, Professor Paul Shaya, we have had this in reports about Iran's parliament speaker, who said that the U.S. is only partially implementing the ceasefire and therefore Hormuz will remain closed. Now, is this calibrated coercion designed to extract leverage, as you said, without triggering full-scale war? Or is Tehran genuinely prepared for a prolonged closure that could actually tip the global economy into recession?
Yes, I think the difference or the pain tolerance between the United States and Iran from an economic standpoint is vast, in the sense that the United States pain tolerance is significantly lower when it comes to spike in economic indicators and prices of oil and other cost of living indicators. And so what you'll see is Iran, which is already suffering from sanctions that have been in place for decades, a poor economy, they're struggling. Now their country, for the most part, has been destroyed. Infrastructure is ruined. It's going to cost billions or hundreds of billions of dollars to get the country back on its feet. So I think that they're willing to take more pain than the United States. And because of that, they're probably willing to use this card, which I think is in reality one of the last few major cards that the Iranians have. But the issue for the Iranians is that the destination of oil from Straits of Hormuz largely goes to countries in Asia. And by that, we mean China, India, Pakistan. So there are significant players who may be also putting pressure on Iran separately to say, you cannot keep the straits closed, because that's going to cause pressure, unexpected pressure, and possibly domestic unrest in some of these other countries as prices spike and economies start failing. People will get upset, angry, and a number of things could happen, a chain reaction that might be very problematic. So I think the Iranians, while they may be able to sustain this from an economic standpoint because they really don't have much to lose at this stage, they're going to feel pressure from others in the global arena. And I think that's going to have an impact on the decisions that they make with respect to the Straits of Hormuz going forward.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's bring in now Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Dr. Salhi, let's turn a little bit to the regional architecture that Iran has built, in which this war has tested to its limits, let's say. So technically, analysts have described Iran's military doctrine as a layered system of forward defense, a hybrid multi-domain approach that blends conventional deterrence and allied non-state partners abroad, missiles and drones for distant punishment, and maritime coercion in the Gulf. Iran's parliament speaker now claims that the US and Israel have suffered a strategic defeat in this conflict, having failed to achieve, that is, their stated objectives. Now, from your expertise in the Middle East politics, has this war validated Iran's forward defense doctrine, or has it exposed perhaps fundamental vulnerabilities that Tehran is now scrambling to address?
So the whole idea of the strategic defense forward relies on building strategic depth, meaning that you deter the adversary outside your borders. And Westerners look at Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis as terrorist organizations that are controlled by Iran. Iran has a different view. It sees this as strategic partners in the fight against the enemy. Not only the enemy of Iran, but the enemy of the Arab world. Israel taking land from Lebanon, that's a national Lebanese problem. The Palestinian issue, the Yemeni issue for that matter. So from their perspective, this is built within solidarity. I tend to view, Karim, that this is more a validation than a defeat. And I'll tell you why. The speaker talked about strategic. The Iranians have won the strategic war. They may have lost the tactical, but they haven't. And let me just give you an example. I know my predecessor guest talked a lot about this, the visit But the Iranian looks at it differently. If you hear the statement that the Prime Minister made, he emphasized that we still haven't talked about any major issues, that the big issues have not been resolved. And that's a strong signal that the core issue, the red lines that the Iranians have not been addressed. So we are going to continue view this as a matter of war. And that is a good reading. How is implemented? I know a different way of looking why Vance is not participating in this delegation is for the fact perhaps that we are following the pattern that you have Kushner and you have Petkov coming out, making this huge deal, meeting in a conference, calling, we reached the deal. In Oman, we've seen it, in other places before that, only to later on, Iran is attacked. Most likely that Vance, Vice President Vance, did not want to appear in this delegation because the plan is already made. That once the time expires and the American troops are ready, we talk about 10,000 people. The end of the ceasefire will lead to Trump declaring the attack. And Vance doesn't want to be associated with that. He wants to be associated with a person who is looking for a peaceful solution. What happened in Pakistan, him leaving 20 hours after, or claims 20 hours because they did not negotiate for 20 hours. But the point is that what happened is that he supported President Donald Trump, but in reality, that's not what Vance would want to be projected, particularly with the elections coming up in 2 years. He's fighting with Rubio, the Secretary of State. So that's one reading. The second reading for it is that the Iranians have also created conditions that support them, and more than that, added depth by projecting their allies. Those people who are working strategic depth are extremely a threat. Now, the threat in this Hormuz thing is the Houthis intervening, the Hezbollah continuing to attack. And that's it's validated. This is a real threat, and United States blockade was designed specifically to deter those, and the threats that is given to organizations. Iran, Friends of Iranian is another example. A third point with that is connected to the fact that the Iranians have been playing by the rules. Now, in your earlier question, you point to how the Iranian initially opened the Hormuz Strait and then closed it. But the reason they closed it was obvious. Trump comes in and tell the Israelis or tell the world that the Strait of Hormuz is open. They open it, and it was open from their perspective. But then the Israelis, by this time, who had received a second warning from President Donald Trump, telling them enough, stop bombarding Lebanon, they didn't stop. So what the Iranians do, they have warned, they have told the American president, the negotiators, that we'll open the Strait of Hormuz when it is when Israel stops attacks against the Lebanese resistance, and they are true to their word. Now, that's add validity in the sense that the partners of Iran, or those that are supposed to project the depth, the strategic depth, are still important, are still main actors. They're still playing the role and defending, standing there firm. Tactically, yes, Lebanon is destroyed. Iran is most likely to be destroyed. But we are witnessing, if we move in on this direction, another U.S. chapter similar to that of Afghanistan. The biggest, however, problem with this is that you have a third party, which is Israel, that seems to be, or frankly, that is pushing for the United States to continue engaged in this war. And any attempt on the United States finding a way out has been sort of stopped by the Israelis. Key point, President Donald Trump comes in and says, Lebanon stopped. We have negotiations in Washington. You have an agreement coming up. But then the Israelis comes back with the moment that was state attacking Lebanon, knowing very well that Iranians will not accept a deal to open the Strait of Hormuz if the war in if Israel doesn't stop attacking Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. And since you mentioned what was happening in Lebanon and Gaza, let me now bring in Mr. Masoud Shajara. While the world's attention has shifted to Iran and Hormuz, Mr. Masoud Shajara, Gaza continues to bleed. The Palestinian death toll since October 2023 now exceeds 72,500. But here's the critical detail. 773 Palestinians have been killed since the Gaza ceasefire came into effect last October, and 2,171 have been injured in near-daily Zionist attacks. Now, the ceasefire has now entered its 7th month, but the killing never stopped. From human rights and international law perspective, what does it mean when a ceasefire is in place, but then the killing continues daily, and 773 additional people are dead under its nominal protection?
Look, it is outrageous. I mean, this is exactly what I was trying to say, and that the meaning of ceasefire and the meaning of end of hostility has completely gone bonkers, and, there is a ceasefire, and immediately the genocide and genocidal act will continue. And, while the international media and everybody else talks about a ceasefire, people are dying every minute, every hour, every day, and every month. And so this is a reality on the ground. This is a reality when it comes to Zionist state, and this is a reality when it comes to the supporters, which includes United States and most of the Western Europe. And this is indeed the issue that needs to be addressed. I mean, Trump a few days ago said that he wants to destroy the whole civilization in Iran. I mean, this is outrageous. Some of his supporters are claiming that this was just a sort of negotiation talk by someone who is good at negotiation. Well, I'm sorry, this is not the reality. The reality is, look at Gaza. Look what is happening in Lebanon. It's not just the empty talk for negotiating or threatening or putting fear in your opposition, but this is the reality that they are implementing. Gaza has been totally destroyed. I mean, there's nothing left of Gaza. Lebanon is being bombed in such a way that is unprecedented in the recent history. What they done in Iran vis-a-vis sort of the civil infrastructure, bridges and so forth, which President Trump brags about it. It's, we are facing a normalization of such a genocidal ideologies that it's a threat to the whole humanity. And it needs to stop. It's not just the Iranians or the people in the region or people in Gaza or Lebanon or the Arab world or the Muslim world needs to stand up. The humanity needs to stand up. This is a front to humanity. And, frankly, I think, it is outrageous that United States political structure and elite are still snoring and in the sleep of not realizing what they are supporting by not opposing this madman. And I think, but ordinary people, as we are seeing in London, Paris, New York, and everywhere around the world, are people, ordinary people, of outrage by this behavior of this madman, and indeed the elite that are supporting it.
Mm-hmm. So technically, Mr. Masoud Shajra, if this pattern of ongoing killing under a nominal ceasefire in both Gaza and now Lebanon and anywhere in the world, as you said, it actually signals a fundamental erosion of what ceasefire even means in international law and practice. And what does this give us, or what does this leave us with trust or whatsoever?
Absolutely. It actually, this is what I mean, some of the observers, both in the West and beyond, are saying that Iran is standing not just for the Iranians, but is standing for some sort of sanity for the world, is actually standing against these concepts that are being normalized. And it really is, therefore, they are really standing as an opposition, not opposition of the dragging the whole civilization and humanity towards that direction. And I think in reality, that is it. Nobody else is. European Union is not standing. Western European nations are not standing. There are now, we are hearing more and more very clear opposition from Spain and France and few other nations in European Union and indeed beyond. But it's not enough. There has to be a lot more. I mean, what is at stake, I want to re-emphasize, is not saving bridges and civilization in Iran, is to protect and save the civilization in the whole world.
Thank you indeed. And now this pattern of impunity is even more stark, perhaps, when we look at Lebanon and where a truce was violated within hours. And here, Mr. Maklow, a 10-day ceasefire between Lebanon and the occupation took effect at midnight Friday, and just within hours, the Lebanese army recorded multiple violations, including massive demolition in Khiyam, tank shelling of villages, and gunfire from newly established occupation positions. One British journalist reported that Israel violated the ceasefire 8 times in the first half hour alone. And according to Al Jazeera, it reports that Israeli forces never fully left southern Lebanon following the November 2024 ceasefire either, continuing hence attacks in violation of that truce for over a year. Now, from a geopolitical risk perspective, and let's speak in general here, what does this cascading pattern of ceasefire violations, either in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, now in this perhaps broader regional context, actually signal to global markets and to other regional actors about the reliability, let's say, of U.S. or U.S. brokered truces in general?
Right. Okay, here the context is specifically U.S. brokered truces. Now, in all fairness, some have actually worked and worked very well. Let's think about Azerbaijan and Armenia. They were already on a very, very good path. The current US president didn't arrive with a magic wand and resolve everything overnight. However, he did create the conditions whereby an agreement was actually made. So we have to be objective and very well done. As regards a great number of other US brokered truces, well, your guests mentioned, obviously, the situation in Gaza, which we all seem to have just quite happily forgotten about. It's quite incredible. We're looking, you mentioned just now, the Lebanon. I mean, let's let's also be very, very clear. I mean, who actually, is there actually anybody out there that believed that a true ceasefire would ever be enacted? And the answer to that is basically no. And we go back to the word that you used, Karim, earlier on, impunity. Because, you know, we're living in a world where, as your previous guest just quite rightly pointed out, we have the President of the United States of America who's bragging about how much destruction has taken place. Now, when we reach the point where the US President brags about violence and destruction, the only conclusion is it's game over. It's finished. Rules-based order is no more. That's the very, very simple bottom line. So there is no punishment. There isn't even any decent form of opposition. As your other guest mentioned, where is Europe, for the sake of argument? Yes, some European countries have said, you're not flying over, you're not using our airspace. Other European nations have denied, I'm making specific reference to Iran and what's happened over the past couple of weeks. Other nations, such as Italy, have denied the use of military bases. But, you know, this is all very much, you know, putting a sticking plaster on something. There is no real opposition whatsoever. There is no form of punishment. It's a different world. And my fear, and I think everybody's fear, is that we will not go back to the situation that existed before, after decades and decades and decades of very, very hard work on the part of some illuminated, very, very intelligent people that created a rules-based order. We've ripped it up. It's gone. My fear is there's no going back to it. But all that said, so, okay, the Lebanon, it's a mess, but did we really expect anything to the contrary? No, we did not. It's as simple as that. But as regards truces in general, and the fact that truces never seem to be worth the paper that they're actually written on, this is the reality of things today. It all matters from a geopolitical risk management point of view and a risk management point of view in general, in the context of corporate considerations. It all matters because let's just start by saying that, you know, we judge ceasefires by behavior, not by announcements. So we all want to hope that ceasefires will actually be enacted and respected, but we're learning that this is just not the case at all. For the markets, it's quite straightforward, really. You know, if a ceasefire begins and then violations appear almost immediately, we draw our conclusions. Things basically don't change. It's volatile, volatile, volatile. There is no measure, there are no tools that allow us to make any form of prediction whatsoever.
So, Mr. Maklow, if the U.S. cannot or will not enforce compliance with a ceasefire it announced, what leverage is left, or what leverage does Washington actually have, and what message does that send to Tehran about the value of any American guarantees in any potential deal?
Well, let's repeat something yet again. I know it's boring to repeat things, but I'm going to repeat something. The US has lost all of its credibility, not just with Iran, but with everybody else. The United States of America, with this administration, does not have any credibility whatsoever. The only leverage that it has is the threat of violence. Mm-hmm. That's the only leverage that the United States of America seems to have at this moment. It doesn't have any particularly sophisticated strategies, certainly not any that can be determined, and certainly none that can actually be understood. It seems very, very much in many, many cases that things are quite literally being invented from one day to the next. So the only leverage that's left the United States of America is violence against those that it considers not in line with its own interests. And this is a clamorous state of affairs, an absolutely clamorous state of affairs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Maklow. And this brings me to another question to Professor Shaya. Professor Shaya, let's turn a little bit to the domestic American political landscape, where this war is exposing perhaps deep fractures. We are seeing what analysts are calling a splintering of the MAGA base over this war. like podcasters such as Tucker Carlson, who has like a lot of followers. He's very popular. He called Trump's threatening Easter Sunday message to Iran vile on every level. In March, Trump publicly removed Carlson from the MAGA movement over his opposition to the Iran war, saying Tucker has lost his way, he's not MAGA. And polling also shows that 66% of Americans oppose military action against Iran, with 76% opposing deployment of ground troops. Now, from a U.S. political perspective, how serious is this fracture within the president's own base? And with midterm elections looming, is the Iran war becoming an electoral liability that could actually cost Republicans control of Congress?
So to your last point, I do think that this war could be a significant liability as we look ahead to the midterm elections. It's clearly not popular. And what happens typically is the party that's in power in the White House tends to perform less well during the midterms after the election cycle for president. So it's expected that the Republican Party would not fare quite as well under normal circumstances. So when you add the significance of this war and the impact, again, as a point of repetition, on the financial markets and on gas prices and the cost of living here in the United States, that is something that is going to catch people's attention. And I do think it's going to have a downward effect on party members in Congress who are looking to hold on to their seats. So I do think there's going to be impact from that perspective. From the MAGA perspective, however, I think that the thing that we're realizing here in the United States is that MAGA is a unique entity unto itself. And it really is all about President Trump. And while some people within the MAGA sphere may feel that what President Trump is doing goes against his ethos in terms of not bringing the United States into any foreign conflicts, I think he still remains extremely popular among his core supporters. And I'm not so worried for him about the impact there. What I think he's mindful of, however, is that for him to come out of this conflict, he has to show them something. And he set some objectives that I think in the long term could be admirable objectives in terms of ending the Iranian influence with its allies throughout the Middle East, limiting its ballistic missile capability, and potentially limiting its nuclear capability. All of those things, I think, make sense from a negotiating standpoint in terms of what is being asked. But he needs to accomplish something so that he can point to his base and really, quite frankly, the United States electorate writ large and say, this is what we accomplished from the sacrifice. I do think that he has as an objective to get out of this conflict in a reasonably short period of time. Will the ceasefire break down this week and a resumption of conflict occur? It's quite possible, but I still think that there's, I don't know how I can articulate it exactly. I'm not sure what kind of plan it is, but I don't think he wants to stay in a conflict situation for very long. So he continues to ratchet up the pressure to try to drive some change in the negotiating stance of the Iranians so that he can get out of this with some victory in hand. And the president is really effective at defining what victory is. And so for him, it may work out okay. But again, to go back to that original point, I think it's going to have a downward negative effect on the Republican Party in the midterm elections.
So, Professor Paul Shaya, it's not enough actually to get back to the point where he promised that there will be no more wars. It's not going to be enough as a political victory for a president who campaigned on America first and avoid any foreign entanglements. Or perhaps he does need a demonstrable, let's say, win on the nuclear file to bring the fractured base back in line.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think he's going to have some demonstrable win. the nuclear file has been the stated reason. I think that's been consistent throughout from prior to the conflict, the failure of negotiations in June of 2025, the failure of negotiations in February of 2026, all the way back into to previous administrations, including President Obama's administration when the JCPOA was signed. The nuclear file is probably the biggest issue that is lingering between the United States and Iran, and that's where he would like to see some kind of achievement, some kind of success in achieving or attaining his objective there, because I think that's the key one, because that's the one that's been sold to the American people as the core justification. There have been a lot of other reasons as the war has continued that we've heard about in terms of why we're doing this and what our goals are. But I think the core one that we've heard consistently during this conflict and for years prior is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And I think that's been consistent. So you're absolutely right, Kareem. I think that's going to be the point where he's going to try to achieve some kind of success, some kind of achievement that meets his expectations so that he can go back to the electorate writ large, but also specifically to his base and say, this was worth it because look what we were able to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Paul. Let me now widen the lens a little bit on the international legal implications with Dr. Hamoud Salhi. ICC, we're going to discuss ICC and war crimes, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. So the International Criminal Court has faced significant challenges in addressing this conflict. Iran's Red Crescent has urged the ICC to examine strikes on civilian sites as possible war crimes. European officials from Switzerland, Germany, and Spain have publicly questioned the legality of the U.S. and Zionist military actions under the UN Charter, and UN experts as well have condemned the Zionist entity's April 8 bombing of Lebanon, which killed at least 303 people in a 10-minute onslaught after a ceasefire was actually announced as a blatant violation of the UN Charter. Yet, analysts note that the ICC lacks jurisdiction over the US, Israel, and Iran, all non-members, making prosecution of war crimes nearly impossible. From an international perspective, what does this jurisdiction gap mean for the future of international criminal law, Dr. Hamoud Salhi? And if the ICC cannot touch the most powerful actors in the world's most consequential conflicts, what its actual function? I mean, what is the actual function of the ICC?
Let me give you an example to illustrate where the ICC is important and where it fails. It took 9 months for the ICC to come up with evidence that the Russians have committed what amount to crimes against humanity in the Ukraine. It took 9 months. In Gaza, it took how many years? And some of the cases are there for decades. Why? Because there is a political pressure. I'll get to the political pressure in a second. But I think we should not undermine what the ICC does or what the ICJ does, for the mere fact that in the end, what defines, what set the boundaries, what established mechanisms for a case, it is the international law and international court of justice, or the word criminal, that defines what crime is. And on the basis of that, you have a clear foundation of what constitutes a crime against humanity. In a lot of cases, it works very, very well. When the Western world are anxious, you come up with new mechanisms to establish, to execute the court order. The resolution or the Security Council or the definition of sovereignty or the intervention in internal affairs, as we know, when the genocide in Rwanda happened, the Western world and along with the court came up with a new definition of sovereignty, that sovereignty doesn't apply when there is a crime committed against the people of that nation, against the nation. So we have that, and that applied with Serbia as well later on, Milosevic. So when there is the intention there, there is sort of execution. But at the same time, there are actually a lot of things happening. Now we know what constitutes a crime, what measures we can implement. The second point that is important is that what the International Criminal Court does is that by creating these cases, you have now a historical record that point to the crimes that are committed against people. And more than anything else, they constitute legal cases or strong data for pursuing studies, research, and more than anything else, putting pressure on those experts to align the definition of crimes with its execution by the court. So you have a good record. And third is the fact that the court rules means that this is a very sort of important point to discuss. And what we've seen is that we've seen a lot of pressure on governments. We've seen a lot of demonstration during Iran, during Gaza. We've seen people riling in the street and creating sort of a perception, a real perception, the contradictions of what's happening. That has impacted, for example, how the Americans came to view Palestine. And here is the most important factor that one could say there is hope in the future, is that we are shifting away from the dominance of the mainstream media. It has become, especially in this last year, how it's easy to record a statement by professors and very clear, and to a point where you think this is fake or something. But the access to the podcast, the access to social media, the access to that sort of, Instagram, all the social media has put is now the main source. And as a result, we hear more about these things. And now we have sort of a questioning the credibility of the mainstream media. When you hear the policymakers, when you hear people today who are in charge, who are sort of particularly the American administration at these times, they say they are not worried about this trend like against Israel or against President Donald Trump. They are not worried about it because these people do not vote. But seriously, these people will vote. If not now, 4 years from now, 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, to me, the International Court, whether it executes its term or not, it remains a valid point. And more than anything else, this leads us to the second, perhaps, section very briefly. It has to do with political pressure. As I mentioned mm-hmm. before, some cases are supported 100% and some are others. And that political pressure, that politicization of these decisions is usually led by an ethnocentric view of the world, that the Western world is put in a higher standard than the South or any other person.
Dr. Hamoud Salhi, as we are reaching the end, very briefly, what could be the end game scenario for you? Are you optimistic?
You have to be high optimistics, and it's despite what we hear, I think we're moving towards major changes in international politics. It's not going to be easy, but in the end, I think this new generation will find a way of how to put the world back in order, despite a lot of skepticism there. I'm by nature optimistic, so I'll remain optimistic until proven wrong.
Hopefully, thank you. And Mr. Masoud Shajari, how would you see the consequences after these talks?
You're seeing the failure of the international community and sanction against judges, prosecutors, ICC and ICJ, and they're even not able to have bank account. But then the positive thing is that the closure of Hormuz is putting much more pressure on international community for a change than international institutions. And this is really a hope that the bully of our time, Trump and Netanyahu, are going to be controlled by being challenged in the way that what we are seeing in Hormuz and by Iran. And hopefully that will be enough to force a change for better.
Thank you. And what about you, Professor Paul Shaya? How would you see the coming days after the deadline collapses? What could be coming next?
Well, my hope is that the deadline gets extended and that the negotiations or the talks can continue, because I think that both sides would like to see the conflict come to an end. Iran desperately needs to regroup, rebuild, and really rethink its strategy for the region and what it wants to be, what kind of impact it wants to have on the region. For the United States, obviously, this was a significant commitment, and as some of your guests have pointed out, it has had an effect on the United States' reputation with some of its allies around the world. And while that is concerning to some extent, I think it's been somewhat typical of the Trump administration to do things on its own. And so there's been a bit of consistency there. But I think in the end, it's best for both parties to try to find a solution. Israel, for this conflict, could be a bit of a wild card because the United States objectives and Israel's objectives differ slightly. But I think what we're seeing in Lebanon, even though the ceasefire hasn't held entirely, is that President Trump has been able to rein in Prime Minister Netanyahu when necessary to achieve broader objectives. And I think that is, in an optimistic perspective, where I hope things will go, is that we can rein this in and that the cooler heads will prevail as we move forward in the next few days.
Hopefully. And Mr. Marklow, briefly, please, how would you see the outcome on economy after these talks?
Well, let's see where these talks actually go. But even if a miracle happens and these talks do actually lead to some form of agreement, which leads to the opening of the Straits of Hormuz, because let's be very, very clear, that which interests everybody, we might not wish to admit this, but that which interests everybody most of all is that the straits are opened and that traffic can resume some form of normality. But that said, it's going to take months and months and months before there is any return to any form of normality. And what that means is there will be not a continuation of the hardship, there will be an even deeper hardship felt in many countries around the world for quite a long time yet. So my feeling is that as regards any return to hostilities, this deadline will pass. It will be extended by a couple of weeks. That will give us breathing space, and this may allow those involved in the talks to come to some sort of decent conclusion. And crossing our fingers, wishing to be optimistic, let's hope that one of the first results is a reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. This is desperately, incredibly important. But that said, even if it happens tomorrow morning, it will take months for things to return to any form of normality. And that basically means months of suffering.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Lowe. My thanks to all our guests for their sharp insights tonight, Mr. Masoud Shajari, Mr. Mark Lowe, Professor Paul Shaya, and Dr. Hamoud Salhi. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 2 days remain before deadline, but the Strait of Hormuz is closed again. The naval blockade continues. In Gaza, the killing goes on. In Lebanon, a truce is being violated within hours of its announcement, and the gaps between the parties on uranium, on Hormuz, on the very definition of what a ceasefire means, remain vast. This is not just a crisis, perhaps it is a test of whether the post-Cold War order, with its treaties, its institutions, its norms, can still function when the world's most powerful nations choose to operate outside it, and a test of whether the conflict can still be contained in a world where the old rules no longer seem to apply, and where new ones are being written in real time by the parties with the most to lose. That's it for tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm your host, Karim Fazakari, and until we meet again, have a good one.